But in the most recent election in Iran, they elected what many have referred to as a smiley-faced new president. His name, Hassan Rouhani. And he came forward to put out in the world a new image of the leadership of Iran. He was referred to as somewhat of a moderate. You've got to recall that the only reason he could run for president, he was one of 5 candidates selected by the Ayatollahs, the Supreme Council. So in other words, he as a candidate had to be in agreement with the leadership, the true leadership of Iran. Well, he was elected. He then started his campaign of trying to massage the leadership of the United States, the leadership of the European Union, the leadership of all the world leaders out there to help them understand that, hey, we're really moderate. What we're doing, our development of a nuclear program is not for military usage, but for domestic usage. I started to laugh when I heard that. I mean, why are they developing nuclear energy for domestic usage when they have the second largest oil supply in all of the world? And if indeed that's the case, they're only trying to develop this weapon of mass destruction for domestic use. What about all of those Shahab-3 missiles that can put a nuclear warhead on them and deliver that nuclear warhead to any target in the state of Israel? So that didn't seem to mix. You've got to also remember that prior to becoming president, Rouhani was the man who was in charge of the atomic energy program, or the nuclear program in Iran. By the way, they received all the technology and the technicians from Russia. And on a future program, we're going to talk about Russia. And there's a very interesting connection between Russia and Iran. But they got this technology, got the technicians, they started developing their nuclear program of a weapon of mass destruction, as you've mentioned. They've got 19,000 centrifuges. I mean, you're a hop, skip, and a jump away from that nuclear warhead that can be mounted on that missile. And not only to deliver it to Israel, I'm going to tell you, Saudi Arabia is very much concerned. In fact, Saudi Arabia, because of the Iranian threat, made contact with the Pakistanis. Pakistan is the only Islamic country in the world with nuclear power, with a weapon of mass destruction. And in fact, much of that was funded by Saudi Arabia. And so the leadership in Saudi Arabia said to the Pakistanis, hey, we've got one of 2 options. You can either give us a nuclear weapon to make certain that we can compete with Iran if they become nuclear powered, or we'll set up our technicians in Pakistan so you can fire a nuclear weapon into Iran if that need be the case. In fact, it has become so interesting in the Middle East. You've got to remember the phrase, politics makes strange bedfellows. And here the Saudi Arabians are now talking with the Israelis saying, wait a minute, here's how we operate our military bases, our Air Force bases in Saudi Arabia. This gives you an avenue going into Iran. Iran is just right across the Persian Gulf from Saudi Arabia. You're going to be allowed to use our airspace. It'll be a quicker way for you to get there into Iran and do a preemptive strike if you're going to have to do it. Well, all of this is the picture of the Middle East at this point in time when in Geneva, the P5+1, the P5, the permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. That would be the United States, it would be Great Britain, it would be France, and then it would also include Russia and China. And then they say +1, that would be Germany. So they go to Geneva. They talk about what they want to do as it relates to accommodating the Iranians, basically. And the end result was, well, the Iranians said, we'll cut back on our enrichment of uranium and thus slow down our development of a weapon of mass destruction. And then the powers that be there in Geneva said, okay, well, we'll pull back the sanctions. Then they said, well, we'll take a 6-month trial period. My question is, how in the world are you going to get the Iranians to do anything? The sanctions that they've lifted have put the Iranians in a spot where they had to come to the table. Now you release those sanctions, you give them back $10 billion worth of the monies they need from the banks that have had their assets frozen around the world. They're going to be allowed to now start selling oil at OPEC, and they want to move back in that number 2 position. They're second only to Saudi Arabia as it relates to indeed what is going to be the production of oil, and that is needed all across the world. They have the Persian Gulf right there where they can unload these petroleum products and send them to every nation of the world. So why are they going to now come back to the table? You've released the sanctions. And in fact, every single country that I talked about in the P5, they're rushing in there with their entrepreneurs, the people in their nations who want to develop a relationship